Good evening. It has come to our attention that the public is reading comic books like this one, and this one, and even this one. This behavior can be traced back to one group in particular, Captured Aural Phantasy Theater of Los Angeles, California. They mine many kinds of pop culture for their performances, but they specialize in bringing comic book stories to life on stage.
Into the basement, Bragg! You know what to do!
Take that, you bad guy!
They've been described as what would happen if Garrison Keillor, John Waters, and Stan Lee all hooked up after a night of hard partying.
X-ray specs, an hilarious optical illusion. Only $1.
A typical show consists of vintage comic book stories performed in a radio show style with live sound effects, music, and multimedia projections of comic book art. People pay to watch comics performed like this with minimal props and costume. Meanwhile, the comics themselves are projected behind the performers, underscoring the story. A typical show usually includes 3 stories with bits interspersed. These bits can be almost anything. Chanteuse singing, musicians playing, magic tricks, performances of comic book advertising, variety acts. Themes can include noir, superheroes, Hollywood, crime, horror, love, teenagers, Saturday morning cartoons, again, anything. They've even begun to develop a special show called Tales from the Comic Book Crackdown, dramatizing the 1954 comic book controversies which pitted the United States Senate against the comic book industry. Much of the material Captured Aural Phantasy Theater performs in their live shows is public domain, but the group also has forged partnerships with legendary comic book publishers. One is EC Comics. The only question is, where will they turn up next? Captured Aural Phantasy Theater. They give old comics a modern voice.
Hi, we're Captured Aural Phantasy Theater. Thank you for joining us. Today we bring you the panel Real Weird Science Alive and at Home.
We'll be teasing out the real science with a real scientist from a legendary 1952 Weird Science comic book. We know that weird science stories were inspired by real science, and in turn, these stories have inspired a few generations of scientists. We wanted to bring that to you.
Our plan is to turn this into an educational podcast connecting the art of comics to science.
But first, who are we?
Hi, I'm Amy Golden.
I'm Ben Dickow.
I'm Billy Bullion.
Hi, I'm Nicole Ortega.
I'm Ray Hedgepeth.
Hi, I'm Michael Uribe.
Hey guys, my name is Jessica Temple and I am here in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and I am thrilled to be here in Comic-Con with all of you.
Oh, hey, I'm Thomas Roach.
Hi, I'm Laurel Dickow.
And hi, I'm Jim Mead.
We're a group of performers based in LA and Chicago that give old comics a modern voice. We usually do live shows, but with the virus, we're moving into the virtual.
Announcing CAPTivity. Get it? CAPT, C-A-P-T, Captured Aural Phantasy Theater. And we're stuck at home. CAPTivity. Get it?
Yeah, CAPTivity is our patented online performance styles that bring comics to life virtually.
Over the years, we have been fortunate enough to work with some really great people, and especially with EC Comics. In fact, we are the only group who is authorized to perform EC Comics live or on Zoom. And today's panel actually speaks towards the original meaning of what EC stood for, which was educational comics.
Oh, by the way, we are very grateful to be invited back to Comic-Con International. This is our 7th year, and we are super excited to be a part of the very first virtual con. Thank you so much for being along and having us.
Let's get back to the panel. Connecting real science to weird science. First, we'd like to give a little context on the Weird Science series from the 50s. And for that, we're enlisting some help. Put this on the computer. Is it going? It's going. All right. So to add a little bit of context and color, we decided to bring in Thommy Burns and Josh Burns, the two founders of the EC Fan Addict Club and Fan Addict EC Fan Addict Fanatics. So Thommy, could you give us a little bit of and you want to say hi, of course, but if you want to give us a little bit of like context about where Weird Science came from.
Well, first I will say hi, I'm Thommy. And Weird Science was part of the much heralded new trend in magazines that EC Comics launched in 1950. And up till then, they'd been doing crime, Western, romance, kind of chasing trends. And they introduced horror comics. And very quickly after the horror comics, they brought in some science fiction because Bill Gaines, publisher of EC Comics, was an avid pulp reader, loved science fiction. And he thought it would be great to do real science fiction, not this, what they called kind of cowboys in space science fiction where there were space detectives or space cowboys, but real science fiction. And so Al Feldstein, the editor at EC, jumped at the opportunity to write some really thoughtful, thought-provoking science fiction for comic books. Cool. So in 1950, the first issue of Weird Science, and nothing was ever the same.
Yeah, the most famous science fiction title. Who was working on these things?
EC hired the best and they paid very well to retain the best. And then they had a mutual admiration society going. So you had guys like Wallace Wood and Al Williamson and Joe Orlando, who are just legendary names in the comic world, but specifically known for their science fiction work. And they'd look at each other's work and try to top it. So you had this mutual admiration society and this friendly competition that ensured that each story would be better than the last in terms of the artistic excellence. And you just know that Bill Gaines was sitting back at his desk going,
yes. Exactly. And Josh, what about the artwork in this particular story?
Well, in this story, it like so many things that Wood illustrated, not just for EC, but all of his comics work, I feel like this story is a great example of how he was able to put sort of constant motion into the frames, even when there's not a lot going on. Because in this story in particular, there's a lot of standing still. There's a lot of people laying down. But there's always motion to the images. And I don't know. I've actually got the comic here, but the splash page.
Oh, the splash page is beautiful.
I think it's a great example of this because the whole story is sort of contained right here, because you got the guys coming out of the ship, you got the woman standing over here, you got behind the woman is one of the cocoons, and the captain Glenn is being diverted. The other guys are coming straight towards the reader, full face towards the reader, and Glenn is diverted away from the reader. And this is the whole point of the story, is that they were going to be there for one day and leave, and they get diverted and end up staying for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so I love that Glenn is a physical embodiment of that in the splash panel. Awesome. And then there's also the little joke that Wood did. This is before his, I don't know if you can see that, but he wrote Wood on a stick at the bottom. So the stick is labeled Wood. His signature is a label on a stick.
That's a great segue to the next part of this panel discussion. But before we leave, Thommy, I wanted to ask, so when did Weird Science end? When did they stop producing it?
In 1953, the last issue was number 22, and there was a sister title called Weird Fantasy that morphed, and they created one magazine called Weird Science Fantasy. Believe it or not, the horror comics were carrying EC, and they continued to do the science fiction because they were so proud of it and they loved it so much, but the sales had declined to where they did one magazine. That ran until the title changed to Incredible Science Fiction, and the very last EC comic ever published was Incredible Science Fiction number 33, and the cover date, I believe, was February of 1956.
Wow.
So a really good run for real science fiction in comic books.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you for doing this. The next part, we're going to actually do the story, The Maiden Cried, as a performance piece. But thank you, Thommy. Thank you, Josh. I know.
Spoiler alert.
No, totally fine. After 70 years.
The end will still be a total surprise.
Yeah. But Thommy, Josh, thank you for doing this today. Say hi to the comic book or Comic-Con audience for me.
Thank you, Ben. Hi, Comic-Con.
Great Comic-Con.
Virtually.
We could be there in person.
Absolutely.
Next year.
Oh.
All right. Take care, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Fantasy, EC, and entertaining comic. Weird Science, number 10. November 1951. 10 cents! Incredible science fiction stories. When they left the planetary paradise that was their home, the maidens cried. What I'm about to tell you began the day the ship landed on the planet I shall call 205D. The astronauts had been hedge-hopping about the galaxy, stopping from time to time at predetermined planets in search of raw materials sorely needed back on Earth. 205D was to be their last stop before returning to Earth. They'd gone over 2 years and were quite anxious to begin their trip home.
All right, men, we're down. Let's get into our spacesuits.
Thank goodness this is the last survey we have to make. I'm so darn homesick.
One by one, they donned their spacesuits and descended from the ship to the surface of 205D.
Commander Valent, there's no need for our spacesuits. Oxygen content is sufficient.
Good, then we can remove our helmets. I suggest we wear the suits for protection. No telling what we'll run into.
There were 5 in the crew of the Earth Federation's Galactic Exploration rocket ship. Besides Valent, there was Andrew Martin, the navigator, Carl William, the geologist.
Help me with my instruments, Andy.
Sure thing, Carl.
Herbert Grodsky, the flight engineer, and Robert Ryle, the biologist.
How is our fuel holding out, Herb?
We've got more than enough for the trip back to Earth, Bob.
Thanks, Herb.
Carl set up his instruments and began to check readings.
How's it look, Carl?
Nothing doing. Not a bleep. No radioactive material on this rock either.
Man.
There had been the story wherever they'd gone. With Earth's uranium supply practically exhausted, the world government had been sending out ships like theirs all over the galaxy, searching for new sources of supply. Except for a rare planet, they'd found none to speak of. They had no luck either.
We'll do some exploring and start home tomorrow.
How about getting started right now, Glenn?
Bob's got to have time to gather his data, Herb. Tomorrow will be soon enough.
Okay, Glenn, I'm just getting a little anxious.
They began moving over the strange terrain. There were many forms of alien animals, but nothing vicious looking.
That's strange. There doesn't seem to be any insect life on this planet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right, Bob. And that's a relief. Boy, remember those insects on 202-13? Oh, Lord, they were murder.
Suddenly, as they moved through the strange vegetation, they came across a horrible-looking little monster feeding upon one of the harmless animals they'd run across.
Oh, it's practically devoured its kill.
When it saw the men, it scurried into the heavy undergrowth and disappeared. They continued on. Then,
Glenn, there's something moving up ahead.
Good Lord.
She came out into the open. She was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. She wasn't exactly human in form. A translucent membrane stretched from her arms to her legs on each side.
It's a woman.
Not exactly. Well, close enough.
He's gorgeous.
She moved toward them. Others appeared.
Look, more!
Each as beautiful as she.
I'm dreaming. Oh.
There must have been 8 of them. They flitted about the men like birds.
Birds! That's it! Those wing-like membranes. I bet one of these creatures could fly.
Birds or no, they look good to me.
The gorgeous woman-like creatures uttered no sounds. They just looked at the men with their exotic-shaped eyes and smiled. Then Glenn realized what their attraction was.
Hold it, boys. Here comes the men.
Oh, wouldn't you just know it just when things were getting interesting?
Their men were ugly, wizened little creatures. The planet's nature had played a foul trick on its female beauties. Their men were hideous.
No wonder we look good to them.
Looks like their men don't like us. See how they're glaring at us?
One of the shriveled males stepped forward, raised his membraned arms, and pointed toward the ship.
Looks like he wants us to scram.
Jealous?
Okay, we're going.
But as the astronauts turned to leave, the woman-like creatures crowded around them. They seemed to be pleading with them to stay.
Seems as though these gals want us to hang around, Glenn.
They won't have to twist my arm.
Then the women beckoned them to follow. The men creatures glared after the astronauts as they moved along after them.
They're like humans. And yet...
Stop analyzing them, Bob.
I'm a biologist.
Fair.
We're coming, girls. Let's go.
The woman led them through the jungle to a large open plain. In the center was a gleaming group of queerly shaped buildings.
Looks like their city.
The buildings seem to be constructed of vegetable matter. They obviously know nothing of metal and its uses.
Just outside the city gates was a grove of weird trees. Scattered among their branches were numerous large globe-like forms. They seemed to be constructed of shiny fiber-like material.
Hey, you're the Bible boy here, Bob. What in the blazes are those things?
Search me, Andy. I haven't the faintest idea. Maybe that's how they protect their fruit.
They passed under the globe-bedecked trees and on into the city. The bird-like women made a big fuss over them. Others came to greet them. They brought trays of food.
Hey, this stuff is delicious.
I hope we're not eating one of those monsters we saw earlier.
They're awesome.
From time to time, one of them wrinkled little men creatures appeared, motioned to them angrily to go, but soon left.
This is the life. Hey, Herb.
Yeah, man.
Hey, say, fellas, now, have you noticed that they don't talk?
Yeah.
They seem to be communicating with each other.
Maybe they converse mentally by receiving each other's thoughts.
Wow. I hope they're not receiving what I'm thinking, eh?
Yeah. Want that over there.
The feast was wonderful. Then the entertainment began. The exotic beauties weaved and swayed in exciting dance routines, circling the fire they built.
Well, men, we've got to be going.
Oh, come on, Glenn. Let's stick around.
Yeah, what's the hurry?
I thought you guys were homesick for Earth.
We were.
Not anymore.
Listen, Glenn. Remember what it was like? Hot, sweltering summers, freezing winters, mosquitoes eating you up alive, the cities, miles and miles without a tree. And pardon me for saying so, but the women?
Yeah, you can have the single standard. Give me this.
I take it you boys would like to stay here?
Hello?
For a while, anyway. How about it, Glenn?
The crew members had made up their minds. Frankly, the idea appealed to Glenn too. He shrugged and agreed.
And if the Birdmen don't get ornery, this could be a delightful experience.
Just think, women that don't talk. Not a word.
Hello.
Man, oh man.
And so they stayed. As I talk, the lovely women things made their welcome. They gave them places to live, waited on them hand and foot. Then, about after 2 months...
Congratulate me, fellows. I'm getting married.
Carl, you old Casanova.
Boy, it must have taken a lot of hand signs.
All thoughts of even returning to Earth left. With Carl breaking the ice, it wasn't long before Andy announced his marriage plans.
You too, Andy?
Yep, I'm crazy about it.
Carl was married first. He went through their strange ritual with tongue in cheek, and they all wished him luck.
If we ever decide to return to Earth, you'll knock him dead with her, Carl.
Cut it out, fellas.
Andy took his bride soon after.
And how about you guys? Hey, when do you break down, huh?
Not me, Andy. I'm not the marrying kind. Besides, there's too large a selection.
One day, Herb and Glenn went to see Carl. It was the first time they'd visit him since his marriage. They found him, stone dead.
Good Lord! He's been dead for a long time.
Oh, we've got to bury him. Oh, Glenn, we got to do it. Oh.
Carl's wife screamed hysterically when they took his body away. She tried to stop them, darting at them like a hawk with those wing-like arms.
Hey, listen, sister, cut it out!
Where we come from, we bury our dead.
The men were all broken up over Carl's death. They buried him in spite of his wife's objections. The Birdmen just leered at them as though they were glad he died. Then, soon after, Bob announced,
Well, you two, I'm gonna take the vows. Congratulate me. I've decided to get married too. Yeah.
Hey, Glenn, you hear that?
Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah.
And so, Bob was married too. Then one day they went to see Andy. They'd not seen him since Carl's funeral. When they arrived at his home, his wife tried to stop them from going on. Finally, Glenn pushed her aside.
Enough of this. I want to see Andy.
Glenn, look! Oh, good Lord.
Andy had been dead for some time. In fact, there wasn't much left of him. One of those horribly disgusting monsters was feeding on his remains. Glenn whipped out his uranium disintegrator and blasted the creature to smithereens. He screamed, and he raved at Andy's wife for letting the ugly monster destroy his body. She only stared back at him dumbly. Later,
I can't help feeling there's something crazy going on, Herb.
Bob, we've got to warn him. Come on, there must be a connection between those ugly monsters and the women.
Herb, I've got it. You've hit the nail on the head. Hurry, I hope we're not too late.
But when they arrived at Bob's home,
Dead! He's dead too! God.
Help me get his body to our building.
Despite his wife's violent objections, Herb and Glenn removed Bob's body to their own place. Then Glenn sneaked out of the city to their rocket ship and returned with several sheets of transparent plastic. With that, Glenn constructed an enclosure somewhat resembling a showcase. Into this, he placed Bob's body.
I don't get it, Glenn. What's all this about?
I've got a hunch, Herb. We've just got to sit tight and see if I'm right.
They took 4-hour shifts watching Bob's body in the plastic case. Then, about a week later...
Good Lord, look! One of those monsters! It was inside the body. Oh.
Just as I suspected.
They watched horrified as the hideous creature fed after it had completely done away with the body.
It's making one of those globe-like things that we saw in the branches of those weird trees when we first came here.
Oh, yes. See how it's encasing itself within it?
Soon the monster was completely encased inside the silky fiber-like globe.
Well, now, Glenn.
Just watch and wait, Herb. I'm sure I'm right now.
About a week later, the globe cracked open. Something was coming out. A complete metamorphosis had taken place. Instead of the disgusting monster, one of the beautiful woman-like emerged.
Incredible. I can't believe it, Glenn.
This is the whole deal in a nutshell, Herb. First of all, one of those wizened little males could have come out too. You wondered why there's no insects here? There's your answer. She is an insect. She somewhat resembles Earth's butterflies or moths. She deposits her egg inside an animal, as the earth moth does on a leaf. The larva that hatches, in this case, a hideous monster, feeds on the body, as the earth caterpillar feeds on leaves. Then the larva spins the fiber globe or cocoon about itself and finally emerges as a fully developed moth woman.
Whoa.
They darted from the building out of the city and through the jungle to the ship.
That explains the membrane wings. They're vestigial orange. I'm a scientist. They're vestigial organs, like man's appendix and tonsils.
Butterflies in humanoid form.
Herb and Glenn hastily prepared to take off. Meanwhile, the lovely moth woman had gathered about their ship.
Look, Glenn, they're sorry we're leaving. They're crying.
Oh, poor things. They don't understand what they've done. To them, it was a natural thing.
As the rocket ship hurtled skyward, leaving the sobbing human butterfly woman far below, Herb turned to Glenn and smiled dryly.
You know, Glenn, that's the first time I ever saw a moth ball.
No. No.
The end. All right, folks.
All right, we're here with Lisa Gonzalez, and so we just performed a story with insects, and we thought, let's talk about some real science about insects, not weird science about insects. So Lisa, a friend of ours, we thought she knows about bugs. Let's bring her on. So Lisa, you are the first weird science scientist. How does that make you feel, for one thing?
Really, really excited because a lot of real science is really weird. So this is my cup of tea. I'm really excited to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, before we get into the science, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where do you work? What do you do? Who are you? That kind of thing.
I work at the Natural History Museum of LA County in the entomology department as a assistant collections manager, specifically on the BioScan project, which is an urban insect survey in Los Angeles.
Oh, cool. And entomologist is a what?
Is a person who studies insects.
Awesome. And why insects? What got you into insects?
I've loved insects ever since I was really small. I was one of those kids, I think we all know one of those kids that's just constantly collecting bugs, and I'd bring bugs into my room and my mom would have to go in there and say, what's going on? Because there'd be stuff crawling all over the house. I was just one of those kids, and I just never outgrew that excitement and interest. And at some point in my life, I realized that I could do that for a living. And I said, sign me up. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
All right. Well, that's a perfect transition then. So let's talk about the field that, or the study that you're like really focused on, the parasitoids, right? Or
parasitoids.
Parasitoids, cool. Which is parasites, basically. Kind of.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
There's sort of like a combination of being a parasite and a predator, which is really interesting.
which is perfect for the story that we just performed. So what did that story get right, if anything?
You know, they actually did get a lot of things right. I think like a lot of these older comics, and then later on the films that were inspired by these older comics, they're taking a lot of bits and pieces of things that they know about insects and then sort of just putting them all in one big pot and like using whatever they find, you know, interesting. And the whole parasitoid life history is something that has been used over and over again, probably most famously in the movie Alien. But you see that in a lot of these earlier comics, right? Which Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, openly admits that he pulled from some of these older comics.
Wow.
So they mention in the story, you know, where the larva, that first kind of phase of their life cycle, is eating internally and then consumes its entire host, and that is exactly what parasitoids do. So for a portion of their life, a true parasite wants to keep its host alive for a long time, right? But if you're something like certain types of insects that go through metamorphosis, and that larval stage is a short period of time, you don't have to keep your host alive for too long. And so eventually they will consume their host, and the host will die, and then they can go through the next stage of metamorphosis. So that's a real thing that a lot of insects do.
That's amazing.
It's really, really very
and
cool.
You say a lot of insects do it. Like what any common insects or?
Yes, actually really common, but just not insects that most people are aware of, because most of these parasitoids are really small. They're only a few millimeters in size, and so it's just something that you can't really appreciate with the naked eye unless you are looking through samples and you're able to use a microscope, or you're looking at macrophotography. So it's just, there are a lot of them around. They're incredibly common, really species-rich group of animals, meaning just a lot of species.
Oh, wow.
And they're actually really important in the agriculture industry because we use them for targeted pest management. So they're a really important group of animals that most people just aren't familiar with.
Yeah,
but
sorry. Does that, I mean, do they ever take over like larger animals, or it always taking over other insects, or what's the?
Most of them are targeting other insects, and it's usually a specific type of insect. So let me back up and just say most of them are types of wasps that are really small, solitary wasps. These are not the wasps that you see making a paper nest, outside your door. This is a very different size and different kind of wasp. And then some of them are flies, and there are some that are beetles. And so usually that particular parasitoid is only going to lay its eggs inside of a particular type of insect. Like it will only lay its eggs in a certain group of butterflies or a certain type of bee or whatever. So they're very specific. There are some that will sometimes lay their eggs inside of mammals, but those are actually, those are really more true parasites than parasitoids.
Okay. And usually they don't burst open and consume the entire animal because they're very small and things like that, right?
Not something large like, a large mammal, but they do that to insects. I mean, there are examples where, the insect is just, it doesn't exactly explode open, but when the larvae are ready to emerge, they come boring out, and it's pretty gruesome. But it's basically being a predator, but just
inside
out. I mean, we eat things from the outside in, and we think it's perfectly normal. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
You use the phrase when we were our pre talking about what was it, life strategy. What are some of the other crazy life strategies in the insect world? Because there's got to be a lot.
Yeah, because there's so many of them. I mean, I think people are familiar with kind of the basic, predator prey relationships. I think an interesting thing to talk about with insects is the whole phenomena of metamorphosis, because that's what we call complete metamorphosis, what we learn about usually with a butterfly.
Yeah.
The larva, the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult.
Beautiful moth woman, the weird alien thing. Yeah, got it.
Exactly. Yes.
Complete metamorphosis. Yeah.
Yes. so that particular adaptation, evolutionary adaptation, or life strategy, if you want to call it that, that's unique to certain types of insects, and that has made them or allowed them to be really, really successful. So the insects that have the most diversity in terms of species and in terms of all the different things that they do are the ones that go through these different life cycles. And if you think about it, if you're an adult and you're eating something completely different than your baby, your larva, you're not competing with your own offspring, which is pretty interesting, right? And then as you are changing, I mean, you're completely starting off as one form, and then in the end you're something completely different. And so you have these different ecological functions that you're doing within one species. So it's that is really, if you want to pinpoint one thing that has allowed the insects to be the most successful in terms of numbers of species, which they are. There's easily over 1 million species. That's a conservative number. It's probably more like 2 million. Actually, it's probably higher than that. We don't even know. There's so many unknown species. That's the kicker. And me personally, parasitoids are the most fascinating of all the insects. I mean, I think, bees are really fascinating too, or insects that communicate are really fascinating as well. But this whole, I like weird stuff. I love sci-fi. Cool. I love horror, and it doesn't get any better than these parasitoids that come bursting out of their hosts. So.
It's so cool that something from this crazy 50s comic is actually connected to real science. That's fantastic. And you just mentioned something about communication. All the alien life forms, the alien insects in the comic are telepathic. They dance, they do this crazy dance. I know bees will do a dance, but in your work, what have you can you comment on that? Or, is there any really cool insect that that does a telepathic sort of communication?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite telepathic.
Okay, sure, of course.
But it's non-verbal, right? So we always use humans and mammals in general. We communicate a lot with sound. But most animals, and insects in particular, they're going to communicate chemically. They're going to communicate with pheromones, and then they're also going to communicate visually by how they move. So in the case of something like the European honeybee, they do this dance that you mentioned. But there are others that will communicate with how they're going to move their appendages, or just body language, basically.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But the whole pheromone thing is really interesting because, there's a language, and there's another sci-fi book that was written about this with ants. Right? There's Empire of the Ants, where they're communicating with pheromones, and this human figures out the language and starts communicating with them. Right. And one quick thing. Okay, so I used to work on these flies that are I still do, I should say, but at the time I was doing specific research in Costa Rica, and we were looking at these flies that are parasitoids on ants, and those flies can smell the alarm pheromones of the ants. So here's an example of the ants will send out an alarm pheromone, and they'll let their sisters know that there's danger, and so they can come and help protect her. And these flies recognize that call, that scent, and so they come in and they know, there's these two colonies fighting, and here's our chance to come in and take advantage of them while they're distracted or distressed. Sinister.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then anything really strike you about the story? Any other comment on it?
I mean, what really struck me is how every page had something that was based on real science, Cool. I mean, I guess it's like the truth is stranger than fiction thing.
Yeah.
I will pull from what really happens. But one thing I noticed that they kind of flipped the story with is that the males were the ones that were really kind of like decrepit and drab, which I love that part. And the females, of course, are, very beautiful. I mean, a man wrote the story, right?
Yeah.
So, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we call that sexual dimorphism when in the same species you have differences in morphology in the way a male and a female looks. I think people are familiar with this with birds, especially something like a peacock is like a classic example of that, right? And so we have that that happens with insects, not all, but many insects, where the females are the ones that are not as colorful, not as ornate, and the males are the ones that sometimes are pretty ridiculously ornate. Like, you know, there's this one fly called the stalk-eyed fly where their eyes come out like this. They look like little hammerhead sharks. And the females, you know, they're into the ones that have like the broader eyes. So it's
no way.
yeah. And with a lot of butterflies too, the males are the ones that are really showy,
Right,
really colorful. Same with some moths, So yeah, that was one thing I noticed. Like, yeah, that happens, but they just, you know, kind of switched it to suit their needs.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, hey, this has been great as the inaugural Real Science conversation of the Weird Science discussion performance. Really, thank you so much for being a part of this. Do you have anything to say to the San Diego Comic-Con virtual audience?
Oh, just that. So I'm someone that goes to cons, and I'm sure I speak for everyone that we're all really missing our communities this year. So just, you know, I hope everybody is being safe and, you know, using this time as much as they can, and that hopefully in the future we'll all be able to come back together again and celebrate what we love and wear costumes and get to give each other big hugs.
And what's your favorite cosplay?
That I've done?
Yeah, that you've done. Sounds like you're that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do actually do cosplay. Probably the silliest and most fun one that I did last year. My partner looks a lot like Bodhi Rook from Rogue One. I mean, he really looks like him. So I made his Bodhi Rook costume, and then I made a costume for the Borgullet, which is that octopus-like creature, and it was a really silly costume, but we got a lot of love from it. So I got to follow him around all day and put my tentacles all over his beautiful hair. That would be my favorite.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this today, and yeah, we'll see you at the con.
Hopefully. Sounds lovely. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was really fun.
You got it. Thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope you've had a wonderful con. Be sure to check out Captured Aural Phantasy Theater online at capturedauralfantasy.com and on social media at CAPTLA. The first episodes of CAPTivity are up, so please enjoy, follow us, and make us very popular.
Have a great summer.
Thank you.
Don't forget to vote.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having us back, Comic-Con.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay safe.
We missed you.
See you next time.
And stay classy, San Diego.
Thank you, Comic-Con. Take care. Bye-bye.
Wave furiously at the camera.